Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today titled Climate Resilience, Demonstrating the Nexus for Growth. My name is Laura Brush, and I'm the Resilience Fellow at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, otherwise known as C2ES. C2ES is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization committed to advancing climate solutions, including policies and practices that can increase the resilience of cities and towns across the US to the increasingly intense and severe climate change hazards that they're facing, from flooding and sea level rise to wildfire and drought and extreme heat. In our webinar today, we'll be exploring strategies that work to advance economic development and climate resilience together, and how these strategies can address the increasing climate and economic risks and impacts that communities are experiencing while positioning them to thrive. So we explore these strategies as well as case studies in our new report, which we're excited to release today, titled The Climate Resilience Economy Nexus, Advancing Common Goals. We can go ahead and share our screen. We've also developed a scrolling story map for viewers that highlights the case studies and how they're advancing both climate resilience and economic development. So I'll just provide a brief overview of the report, where we explore best practices in local and regional initiatives that are working at the nexus of economic development and climate resilience, and how these common strategies can reduce climate and economic risks while creating new opportunities for communities. We think actions at this nexus are critical as communities and local economies are seeing economic impacts over both the short and long term due to the increasingly intense and severe weather events that are being amplified by climate change. For example, climate hazards are damaging businesses and operations and interrupting supply chains. They're causing destruction to critical infrastructure like utility systems and transportation networks, like we saw in the February 2021 Texas winter storm. Further, small businesses, which are often the backbone of local economies, can permanently close or be slow to rebuild when damages are costly, like with Hurricane Ida last summer. Hazards like extreme heat can also disrupt business operations by making it too dangerous for workers to do their jobs. And local housing supply and home affordability, and subsequently the long-term livability of neighborhoods, are also being impacted. These changes are affecting low-income and socially vulnerable communities the most, as they're often located in areas of cities with higher risks of hazards like extreme heat and flooding. So, and finally, municipal budgets and finances, which support economic development activities, can be depleted by just one extreme weather event, let alone the repeat events that communities are experiencing. Integration between economic development and climate resilience at the local and regional levels, we think, can address these risks, achieve common objectives, and create new economic opportunities. However, integrated planning between them is uncommon, as evidenced in C2ES's 2020 report, The Resilience Factor, a Competitive Edge for Climate-Ready Cities, where we explored the connections between climate resilience and local economic competitiveness. Notably, our research revealed a disconnect between local climate resilience planning activities and economic development efforts, which we see as a significant gap in action, and think that integrating climate resilience and economic development is critical to robustly addressing climate risks, achieving common objectives, and unlocking new opportunities and growth. Next slide. So what does this integration and collaboration between economic development and climate resilience actually look like? There are a number of goals that communities can set to advance them both together. These include embedding climate resilience in development and infrastructure projects to ensure that they're built to last, retaining or growing the business community, particularly small businesses, in the face of more frequent and intense climate hazards. Also diversifying the economy when primary sectors like coastal tourism, for example, are at high risk from climate hazards. Focusing equitable economic development and climate resilience efforts to support low-income communities and communities of color. Recruiting and developing a business community that offers resilient solutions for local governments and businesses and households. Also developing the workforce for industries that supports climate resilience. And positioning climate resilience and resilience-related projects as local attributes to attract new businesses and residents. Next slide. So the various stakeholders involved in economic development and climate resilience, including staff within local governments, councils of government, chambers of commerce, and workforce development boards, among others, have a number of tools that they can use, that they already use frequently, that can be tailored to achieve the goals I just mentioned. These tools and strategies include, for example, assessment and planning processes that increase coordination to identify mutual goals and strategies between climate resilience and economic development, as well as the private sector. Also, financing infrastructure investments through local funding mechanisms or state and federal sources, which can support the resilience of critical assets that businesses and communities rely on. Local policies and zoning regulations can be adapted to guide economic development in more resilient areas of a city, or to implement resilient strategies like structural elevation in existing higher risk areas. Public-private partnerships for financing and planning and expertise sharing, as well as outreach and education to small businesses, can also be harnessed to support resilience of the private sector. Community protections like community benefits agreements developed alongside low-income communities and communities of color can avoid displacement and increase the supply of affordable housing. Workforce development programs can support upskilling for workers, while business incubators and accelerators can develop the local business community and provide resilient services and technologies to the community. Next slide. So the focus of our new report is case studies from cities across the country that illustrate real-world examples where these strategies are being used in innovative ways, serving as models for other communities experiencing similar climate impacts and risks and expected to into the future. We think that the approaches outlined in these case studies will become imperative best practices for more communities across the US as climate impacts continue to worsen. The case studies we explore focus on initiatives in the cities that you can see on the map here. So Baltimore, Cedar Rapids, Fort Lauderdale, Sonoma County, California, Norfolk, Virginia, Ithaca, and North Charleston, South Carolina. On our webinar today, we'll hear from speakers involved in 2 of these initiatives in Norfolk and Sonoma County, and we'll also report out themes and lessons learned from our other case studies. After our speaker presentations, we'll have time for Q&A, and we'd love for this to be a dynamic conversation. So please send in questions for the speakers as they come up, and we'll do our best to address them. Also, we're recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website and YouTube within 24 hours. So with that, I'm happy to introduce our speakers for today. First, we'll hear from Katerina Oskarsson. Katerina is the Chief Strategy Officer for RISE Resilience Innovations in the Norfolk area of Virginia. Previously, she was the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Norfolk, where she worked on the development and implementation of the city's resilience strategy as part of the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities initiative. Katerina will be discussing how RISE is accelerating technologies and building out the climate resilience industry. After that, we'll hear from Benjamin Goldstein. Benjamin is Dean of Agriculture and Natural Resources at Santa Rosa Junior College in Sonoma County, California. Prior to his current role, he served as a dean at Los Angeles Trade Technical College and worked at the U.S. Department of Energy, where he managed workforce training activities to support new jobs in energy efficiency and renewable energy. Benjamin will be discussing the new Wildfire Resilience Academic Program at Santa Rosa Junior College, which aims to equip students with the skills needed for careers in wildfire resilience, supporting the resilience of the wider region. And finally, we'll hear from Cassandra Bhat, Director of Climate Resilience at ICF. Cassie has worked at ICF for over 12 years with cities, states, federal agencies, companies, and other organizations to assess and manage their climate risks. Cassie and her team partnered with C2ES on this report, and she'll be sharing an overview of our other case studies as well as key themes and lessons learned. So with that, I will turn it over to Katerina.
Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Katerina Oskarsson. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for RISE, a nonprofit organization based in Norfolk, Virginia. And my goal here today is to share how RISE is turning climate challenges into opportunities to create new businesses, jobs, and innovative solutions in urban and rural coastal Virginia. Our mission is to accelerate innovation and business growth around new solutions to coastal communities' resilience challenges. And we do it by providing one-stop shop resources that small businesses and entrepreneurs need to launch, validate, and scale these next generation technologies, products, and services that we will need and that help coastal communities adapt, in our case, particularly to flooding and sea level rise. And coastal Virginia is the perfect living laboratory for the businesses we support because of a diversity of flooding and infrastructure challenges we face, and also a diversity of environments where these challenges manifest themselves. With its low elevation, long shorelines, and some of the highest rates of relative sea level rise along the East Coast, coastal Virginia is particularly vulnerable to flooding. In fact, water is coming in from all sides, even during sunny days when the tide is high. On top of that, we have, as many other communities, limited room for new infrastructure to accommodate all this flooding and stormwater management. We have aging systems that are unable to keep pace with rising seas and increasing rainwater. And of course, our underserved communities are often the ones bearing the brunt of all these flooding that we face. And these challenges are very representative of threats that other coastal communities are already facing. So while water is one of the main threat, it's also our main asset. Coastal Virginia is home to nationally important assets that rely on access to water. For example, the Hampton Roads region where RISE is located hosts the largest concentration of US defense facilities in the world, including the world's largest naval base, Naval Station Norfolk. We are home to an early quarter of the nation's active duty military personnel. We are home to the only NATO's headquarters on US soil, as well as the third largest commercial port on the East Coast. And of course, all these assets rely on the surrounding community. And so to continue this important work on the coast, we have to adapt to live with more water. We cannot retreat, we just really have to find ways to adapt. And the region has major resilience need, but all these big infrastructure solutions cost tens of millions of dollars and take years and decades to implement. And so in the meantime, we need affordable solutions that can help us reduce risk now in a short term, and also to make those long-term solutions more affordable through innovation. And so all that was sort of the motivation behind the creation of RISE. RISE is funded with $5 million of a $1 billion grant that the US Department of Housing and Urban Development granted to coastal communities through its National Disaster Resilience Competition in 2017, with additional matching funds from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the vast majority of that $1 billion was allocated to major long-term infrastructure. But relatively small portion awarded to RISE has really helped to create a model for other communities that want to accelerate new businesses, new ideas, and new innovations in the coastal resilience field. So, let's see. Okay, so what's that model? What's really the genesis behind our work? So we start by identifying the problem. We work with local cities, our urban, rural communities, and other stakeholders to identify the most pressing problems in need of innovation. From there, we design challenges or innovation competitions based on those problems, such as protection of building and property or any other pain points that these communities face. And we invite companies from all around the world to compete to join our year-long comprehensive program and win a funded pilot project using coastal Virginia as a real-world test bed to test, refine, and scale their solutions. We facilitate access to this real-world infrastructure, coordinate installation and evaluation, because it's really at the city level, it's really not nobody's job to work with startups to develop new solutions. So you need an organization such as RISE to enable this work and act as a broker. At the same time, it's one thing to have a great new technology, but a very different thing is to build a business around it. And so we provide tailored support to our businesses through business model readiness, assistance in securing other critically needed startup assets, access to other investors, and so on. And lastly, we provide catalytic funding in the form of grants and revenue-based loans, which companies pay back out of their gross revenues. So they only pay us back when they succeed. And so it's in our interest to help them succeed as well, so that we can stay sustainable. And by requiring companies to pilot these projects in coastal Virginia, they often choose to open new space in the region, hire local workers during and after their projects, adding greater economic benefit to our area. To date, we have initiated more than 30 novel pilot projects, so 30 novel technologies, products, and services that solve the real-life climate challenges that these urban and rural coastal communities face today. And just to give you very few examples, for example, Flood Map, one of our businesses, came to us from Australia, and they launch and are testing the world's first integration of flood modeling technology with Waze Traffic app, which offers drivers real-time alerts to help them navigate flooded roads. So the challenge behind that led to the solution was the fact that we will never be able to raise all roads vulnerable to flooding. And so communities were asking us, what's innovation? What in this field, what else can we do to at least provide people with tools to help them make better decisions and keep them out of harm's way? And that's how we arrived at this solution. Another example, Resilience Enterprise Solutions, another startup that we work with, they are piloting the nation's first home raising academy that provides workforce training and certification in the home elevation industry. Today, it's oftentimes more expensive to raise the house than to move and buy a new one. And so how can we create better solutions and more skilled workers to decrease costs of home elevation? That was the challenge behind this solution. Natrix, another company that came to us, is developing mobile manufacturing units that produce nature-based shoreline protection structures to mitigate flooding faster, safer, and more affordably. And here the challenge was we need a more affordable and higher performing solutions than rock that a lot of communities are using to restore shorelines. And as you can see from the chart, Matrix solution is significantly cheaper and cost effective. And finally, storm sensor use our area as a living lab to develop new monitoring software and sensors that provide real-time analytics and alerts to prevent backflow flooding and help prioritize retrofits and plan future infrastructure projects by putting these sensors inside of the actual stormwater system so that you can collect real-time data on how water is moving, which then helps you design much better solutions instead of just relying sort of on hypothetical models that are oftentimes outdated. So here are just a few of the ways we made an impact in less than 5 years. So in less than 5 years, we have deployed over $6 million in funding and wraparound support to more than 35 businesses developing these new technologies, products, and services. And in addition to giving communities more affordable tools to adapt to climate change, we've also contributed to economic and job growth and serve as a launchpad for businesses to attract follow-on investments so that they can go to other communities and help more people faster. We've also shown that HAT's seed investment to build and foster this very first coastal resilience industry cluster continues to yield substantial results. And looking ahead, our next challenge will tackle a familiar and very prominent issue facing all coastal communities, which is flood insurance. And so we plan to officially launch this new challenge this summer, and we will offer businesses seed funding and real-world testbeds and business support for solutions that reduce flood-related insurance premium and payouts by, we hope, 50%. And we are always looking for partners, businesses, and great ideas. So please reach out to me with any of those. Here is my email address. And I would love to continue the discussion. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk, to present today, and I'll turn it back to Laura.
Thanks so much, Katerina. Now we will turn to Benjamin Goldstein from Santa Rosa Junior College.
Great, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Benjamin Goldstein. I am the Dean of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Department at Santa Rosa Junior College. We are a 2-year community college located in Sonoma County, California. We offer certificates of completion in various career education or vocational programs, as well as 2-year associate's degrees for transfer. Today, I'm going to talk about our fairly new wildfire resilience program. We launched this in 2019, coming on the heels of the second of 3 major catastrophic wildfires in Sonoma County, beginning in 2017. So I'm going to provide an overview of the program, what we do, and then talk about some recommendations around funding, policy, and collaborations that I think are best practices that we've started to learn. So just quickly, we're 100 years old as a community college. We were founded in 1918. We currently enroll 25,000 or so students every semester. That is, some of them are just taking one class for 1, 2, or 3 units. Some are full-time enrolled. Like I mentioned, we offer associate's degrees and career education certificates, and this community has been through 3 catastrophic wildfires since 2017. The first destroyed over 5,000 homes and killed 20 people. The subsequent 2 did slightly less damage, but caused an evacuation of over 200,000 people it was the largest evacuation in Sonoma County's history. We've also been neighbors to other catastrophic wildfires in California, in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and down south in LA and Ventura. So California has really been through the ringer over the last couple of years in terms of catastrophic wildfires. And as a community college, it's our job to respond. So we're looking at this as an opportunity to train students in jobs and skills that are needed by the industry to be on the front lines of wildfire prevention and wildfire suppression on the firefighting side. So there's 4 pillars to our program. What we did was really contextualize wildfire resilience within 3 existing programs. So that's kind of the first lesson learned, is particularly in higher education, things move very slowly, and it's a lot quicker to pivot an existing program than it is to develop something completely new out of whole cloth. So we took our animal science program, our natural resources program, and our horticulture program, and looked at ways to infuse wildfire resilience knowledge, skills, and abilities into those existing programs, so that all the students going through those programs were coming out with a certain amount of industry recognized skills that they could then use in their employment. We also developed a new hands-on learning, work-based learning opportunity at our college farm. This is paid because in today's economy, you cannot expect students to do free work. So it's paid, and we've already had 35 students go through this program since summer of 2021. We also have 2 new initiatives in development. One is focused on the existing landscaper workforce. In California, this is predominantly a Latino or Latinx workforce. And so this program is bilingual in English and Spanish. And we're trying to plug into what are emerging incentive programs that are flowing through the county and local cities, jurisdictions, to provide incentives to homeowners and property owners to do defensible space work and structure hardening around their homes. So there's a policy play here, is if dollars are going to flow to homeowners to do work and they're going to hire contractors, what are the contractors need in terms of a credential, and what do they need in terms of authorization from the jurisdiction to be capable of doing that work? So we're plugged into that policy conversation. And then we've got also a very new program in development focused on utility line clearance. The cause of 2 of the 3 major wildfires in Sonoma County over the past 3 years has been sparks from utility lines hitting trees or hitting their own utility poles and arcing and causing showers of embers and sparks. And so there's a tremendous amount of work and a huge labor need for utility arborists that can go around and clear trees and other vegetation away from power lines. So that's called contract education, because it's basically us working with employers to train existing employees. So let me just get you interested with a couple of photos here. This is a group of the students working in our 120-acre forest. They're learning chainsaw work. They're learning tree identification, tree health, and brush clearing and vegetation management skills. There's something about chainsaws and drip torches and fires that makes students very happy. And I think this is a big part of our program, is showing students that they can earn money, learn on the job, and do something outdoors in nature that they really enjoy, while contributing to the overall safety and security of our community. So there's kind of there's a goodwill or a community benefit to this work that students have really tapped into. This is an image of using goats and sheep for prescribed grazing, using livestock to reduce fuel loads in wooded or vegetated areas. Goats will eat poison oak. They will eat blackberries. So this is a way, and it's also an economic engine for livestock grazers in the county to use their animals to basically go around and serve as contract grazers at homeowners and at regional parks and other public properties. Same thing with cattle, using cattle for pasture lands primarily. If grass gets too high in California in the summer, it's dry, it's brittle, it's flammable. So we really need livestock to be on the land to reduce fuel loads. And then fire resilient landscaping in our horticulture program. This is using drought tolerant plants, fire resilient plants to be able to landscape around folks' homes in a way that protects homes from fire. If fire comes through the area, the number one thing that burns is landscaping around the home, and then that ignites the home, and then the home is lost. So here's a slide to talk about industry collaborations. This is not even exhaustive. One thing I'm really proud of is this community has come together around our community college and our wildfire resilience program. And we've got nonprofits, we've got for-profits, we've got government entities, we've got Native American organizations, the regional parks, which is the county parks, and the UC Cooperative Extension System, all supporting us with technical expertise, recruitment, outreach, etc. We also had a huge amount of buy-in from our college community. And that's one of the lessons learned, is that we, in order to launch something like this in an institution of higher education, but I would say in a nonprofit institution as well, you need buy-in from the president to payroll and everybody in between, because it takes a whole village really to launch and run a program like this. So in terms of funding, we received an initial investment of $500,000 from the County of Sonoma. This was money that was awarded to the county through a settlement with Pacific Gas and Electric, which is the major gas and electric utility, in the aftermath of the 2017 firestorm. So these were essentially civil penalties paid by the utility to the county and then granted to us, as well as there was millions of dollars used for road repair and homeowner liability, et cetera, et cetera. We also were fortunate to land about $200,000 in state grants for career education. This purchased a lot of equipment. And then we have some philanthropic donors that have come in to support the student stipends, because that's really hard to pay students out of government or state money. But the philanthropic donors have come in to kind of address that need of paying students for this work. So lessons learned. I mean, prevention is cheaper than the cure. That is an old adage, and it is all the more true when you're talking about natural disasters, especially wildfire, because with wildfire, you can do something in advance to prevent the risk of wildfire or to prevent the damages caused by wildfire. Because when trees burn, that's one thing. When homes burn, people die or people lose their livelihood. So we need dedicated funding streams to build durable programs. And government needs to understand that it's a whole lot cheaper to do prevention than to come in the aftermath and clean up from a natural disaster. The insurance companies, I think, are recognizing this as well, because they're on the hook for all of these claims that are coming after a natural disaster of this magnitude. So the other lesson learned is effective programs need dedicated staff. This is not new, but this is endemic to the nonprofit world, to higher education. If you want to do something right, you have to have a point person in charge. I am currently running this program, but I'm about to hire a full-time manager because I cannot do this as a side hustle anymore. This needs to be fully owned and operated by one entity within the organization. And that takes funding. When you talk about salary and benefits for a public sector employee, you know, it's $100,000 plus. But that's the cost of doing business if you want to have somebody in this role that's point person. Organization buy-in is critical. I talked about that from payroll to the president. And then industry collaborations just require time, persistence. And again, this relates back to you need a point person that can follow up, create those channels and those pipelines between education and the workforce. So a couple recommendations. Federal funding, whether it be Department of Labor, Department of Education has the Perkins program for vocational education, FEMA, USDA, Forest Service. There are a number, and I used to work for the Department of Energy and lead the workforce development programming there during the Recovery Act. There are a number of federal agencies that all are in this space around disaster prevention, disaster recovery. Katerina talked about housing and urban development. So I think, but it really requires a federal conversation and a coordination around who's funding which types of disaster prevention and resilience programming. But it can be in all of the above. There's no reason that this needs to be siloed in one federal agency, but the prevention money really needs to flow across the board. I think that we're at the point now where a state or a national community of practice would really be beneficial around resilience, workforce development, and economic development around natural disasters and climate resilience. And whether that happens at the state level or the national level, there's pros and cons to both, but we really need to start sharing best practices and talking to each other. And that's where an organization like C2ES comes in, because the publication that was released today, the recommendations that are in that publication, the case studies, start to help folks like me not have to develop programs from scratch or from whole cloth. So I'll end there. I know we're gonna have time for questions. My contact information is in this slide. Like I said, we are at the very beginning of this ramp up, and it's gonna be an exciting ride over the next couple of years. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Benjamin, for the overview of the program and your thoughts on lessons learned and recommendations. So now we will turn to Cassandra Bhat of ICF to discuss some of the other case studies that we looked into as part of this research.
Oh, great. You can go ahead to the next slide. So exactly, as Laura mentioned, we conducted 5 case studies of the examples of this nexus between climate resilience and economic development. And Katerina and Benjamin have already shared their experiences. And so I'll share a few more, as well as some of the key themes that emerged across all of the examples we looked at. First, I'll talk about the Port Covington development project in Baltimore. This is one of the largest urban revitalization projects in the country, where an underused 235-acre industrial site is being transformed into a new neighborhood and mixed-use community. It's a $5.5 billion development, includes office space, housing, retail, hospitality, marinas, parking, and over 40 acres of park and green space. So it's an example of a project or initiative that is, at its core about economic development. It's a development project, but the project leaders also made direct investments in climate resilience measures in developing the project to ensure that Port Covington will be resilient to future heavy rainfall, coastal flooding, and extreme heat events. So for example, they've installed a bulkhead along the water's edge, elevated critical low points of the site, and sized storm drains for a 1,000-year rain event to account for future increases in heavy rainfall. And so including these climate resilience measures as part of the project ensures that the long-term benefits and cost savings from the project, like maintaining quality of life for the residents and patrons, minimizing disruptions to economic activities in the neighborhood, avoiding the costs of certain response measures like pumping and sandbagging during heavy rain events, and overall protecting the area from repeat damage. Next slide. Another example or case study that somewhat flips the script from the Port Covington example is from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where there was a major flood in 2008, and then the ensuing rebuilding efforts sought not only to address the existing and future flood risk, but also increase economic growth and prosperity in the city at the same time. So this is a strategy that sort of starts from the fundamental flood protection angle. It's a about flood risk management, but is designed to, with local economic and community benefits in mind. So for example, it includes an amphitheater that doubles as a levee, and open space and trails for recreational activities and outdoor gatherings. So it's designed in such a way that it increases the flood resilience of the community, but also includes a number of economic growth and development benefits. The next slide. This next case study is a different type of example in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So this is a case where, Fort Lauderdale and South Florida in general is an area where local governments, really in the broader South Florida region, are very active in climate resilience. But a key point here is that local chambers of commerce are a critical and very active part of that network of the people who are working to advance climate resilience in the region. So the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, for example, has an economic resilience council that supports increased funding for flood resilience projects, engages with politicians, and helps advance local government climate action planning activities. The chamber has also developed resilience action groups that advocate for resilience needs of the community and create a 5-year vision for the business community that has actionable goals for how they can contribute to resilience. And the chamber has also sponsored a regional study to quantify the business case for climate adaptation measures. And those are just a handful of examples of the activities they're undertaking. But it's really, overall, Fort Lauderdale is an example where the business community recognizes that climate resilience is fundamental to economic growth, and so actively participates in the efforts to advance climate resilience, both by local governments and by the private sector. Next slide. And then our final 2 case studies, in our research, we looked at 2 examples that really highlight how equity fits into this nexus and really show how equity, economic resilience, and climate resilience can all go hand in hand. So in Ithaca, New York, for example, the city has a program to retrofit and decarbonize all existing residential and commercial buildings by 2030. It's about 6,000 buildings in total. And a key objective of that program is to make sure that at least 50% of the benefits from that program go to communities of color in Ithaca. Overall, these investments lead to improvements in indoor air quality and thermal comfort, as well as reduced electricity costs. And so that is helpful too, especially in the face of rising temperatures and increasing kind of cooling energy demands in the future. So it's an example where a city is making sustainability and resilience investments that benefit economic growth, but it's doing so in a way that really makes sure that those benefits are dispersed equitably across the community. And finally, in North Charleston, South Carolina, some community climate resilience planning work that was organized by EPA really revealed that a key finding of those workshops was that economic development needs were central to their climate resilience, and there were economic development needs in this low-income minority community that really needed to be met in order for the community to be climate resilient as well. Things like improving access to jobs, quality housing, and even healthy food. Next slide. So what these case studies as a whole show us is that there are many forms of overlap between climate resilience and economic development. And there's also several key themes that emerged across these case studies that I'll walk through. One is that engaging the existing local private sector in a community is critical, when you're working on initiatives to support climate resilience and or economic development. When the business community has a strong understanding of the value of climate resilience in terms of the cost of inaction and the return on investment of these projects, that can support their buy-in, and they can be all the more powerful supporters, like in Fort Lauderdale as an example. Next, at the same time as engaging the private sector, engaging community members is again critical to gain their support and ensuring that the projects are comprehensively addressing local risks and avoiding exacerbating any existing inequities. And as these efforts are undertaken, they're done so in a holistic way with not just climate resilience and economic development, but other kind of social considerations as well. Thirdly, I think a key takeaway, which may seem obvious on its face, but just is worth noting, these infrastructure-based initiatives that are focused primarily on mitigating physical climate risks or climate adaptation investments, like the Cedar Rapids flood risk management efforts, can be done in such a way that maximizes benefits for local economies and communities, especially when the community, both sort of the community members at large and the private sector, are actively engaged in that design process. So with community input on wants and needs, the decision makers can, for example, preference green infrastructure or tailor green infrastructure to provide benefits like public space and recreation, again, like in the Cedar Rapids example. Another key takeaway is that for local government stakeholders who are focused on climate resilience, there are lots of innovative approaches out there to climate risk mitigation that can maximize benefits for local economies. I think the RISE example that Katerina spoke about is an excellent example of that. And finally, workforce development is as important to economic development as infrastructure-based projects. I think Benjamin's presentation highlighted that really well. And there are opportunities for communities and regions to develop their workforce in a way that allows them to better manage their increasing climate risks. And all of these themes are really about exploring ways to expand the center of that Venn diagram, such that efforts to address climate resilience are boosting economic development, and the efforts to improve economic growth are also climate resilient, and ultimately all one and the same. So with that, I'll wrap up, but happy to take any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Cassie, so much for the overview. So with our remaining time, I'd love to invite all of our speakers back to the screen for some questions. And we've gotten a few from the audience, but feel free to submit any others as well. So first, I'd like to just call out a common thread across the projects we feature in our report is that they're involving many often very different types of stakeholders. So I'm wondering, with Katerina and Benjamin with the programs that you're administrating, Cassie with the initiatives that we looked at through the case studies and others you may have been involved in the past, you could discuss sort of challenges you faced in bringing together the various stakeholder groups involved with your program, whether that's local officials or the business community, foundations and nonprofits, or educational institutions, and what has helped overcome those challenges. We can start with whoever would like to chime in.
I'm happy to go first, Laura. So number one challenge on our end is just the sheer amount of time and effort it takes to really do proper engagement with industry and with government officials. And so as I referenced in my presentation, when at all possible, you need a point person that's their job is to play air traffic controller, quarterback, whatever the metaphor you want is, and liaison with these various organizations. And that takes funding, plain and simple. If you give that job to somebody else that has several jobs already, it doesn't get prioritized the way that it should. I would say the second challenge and or opportunity that we've encountered is that everybody gets excited and everybody wants to support something like this. And you have to learn kind of how to say yes and how to say no sometimes, because having too many cooks in the kitchen can actually be a detriment to progress. And I think folks are probably familiar with that. So filtering out the stakeholders and really understanding who needs to be at the table, who needs to be kind of in the loop, but doing so diplomatically requires a certain amount of small p politicking and diplomacy, right? But like, you can spend an exorbitant amount of time in the stakeholder engagement space and never get any work done. So at a certain point, you just have to go and say, you know what, if some folks have their feathers ruffled because they don't feel properly included, that's just how it's going to have to be, because we got fire season coming down, bearing upon us, right? Or another flood's coming, and we just have to get to work. So I hope that helps. Yeah, curious to see what Katerina says.
Yeah, I agree with everything Benjamin said. It's similar to what we experience at RISE, but I think for us, a lot of communities come to us with a lot of different problems they would like us to pose as a challenge for a global community to solve. And we have to be very selective about the pain points we focus on, right? Because only if you're solving a really big problem, people will be sort of willing to come together and partner with you, and there will be more appetite for collaboration. So the problem needs to be big enough, and so there goes a lot of work into just really understanding the challenge and making sure, and talking to a lot of, not just Norfolk or Hampton Roads, talking to other coastal communities in the US, making sure that it's scalable, replicable, and they have the same issue, so that we're never solving just for Norfolk or Hampton Roads. On the other hand, sort of bringing stakeholders together is an area of strength for RISE. And as Benjamin said, you need a dedicated organization or person to do that. It does not happen organically. And so, by working regularly with our municipal partners and other stakeholders to build and maintain relationships and trust, we've been able to bring down a lot of these barriers, sort of bureaucratic barriers, right? So that when we bring these startups in, we are able to move quickly. So you need those commitments. You have to make sure that you have those commitments sort of early on. I think what's also important on the municipal side is to really make sure that they have a dedicated person willing to interact with these startups and organizations like RISE. And in our experience, unless there is sort of a resilience office, chief resilience officer, or someone multidisciplinary like that, it's usually no one's job to, everyone wants innovation and better solutions, but there is no one to really do that type of work. So you need an innovation office or resilience office on a municipal level to be able to do what we do.
And I'll add in, I agree with everything Benjamin and Katerina just said, and just add one other, I think, common challenge that we've observed both across these case studies and just, I know in my work in general, is just language and terminology in bringing a bunch of diverse stakeholders together and making sure everyone and whoever is coordinating is being really explicit about what language is being used and what people mean. Even the word resilience can mean a lot of things to different people. People coming from kind of a climate change background versus an economic development background, it can mean different things. So just being really, throw all assumptions out the door and just assume nobody knows anything or is not speaking the same language, and make sure you're all sort of starting from the same place.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. And I think relates a little bit to my other question that I wanted to highlight. So another theme that, we see across the case studies we feature in the report, as well as the two case studies in North Charleston and Ithaca that are really focused on equity, is, working to give low-income communities and marginalized communities a seat at the table. So I'm curious if you all could sort of explain in the projects, again, that you're either involved in or are, the ones that we've looked at, how exactly the programs are working to advance equity and what strategies are really used to advance this.
Katerina, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, sure. So when we work with our municipal partners, we always try to prioritize pilot project sites in historically underserved areas, because oftentimes those are the areas bearing the brunt of storm and flooding, but they are also sort of great living laboratory, because that's where those problems are sort of manifesting themselves most severely. So if you can solve for those areas, likelihood is it's going to work elsewhere as well. And so we intentionally try to look for test beds that serve in these areas. And then we also, after testing our model in urban communities, we have also expanded to rural coastal communities that are oftentimes overlooked, and their flooding and sea level rise problems are different, and so they need sort of unique focus. We recently completed our first rural coastal community resilience challenge, addressing issues such as septic system failure, upcycling of dredge materials, the issues that you don't see in urban areas. So I think that those are the main examples how we advance equity.
Yeah, and I'll say there's kind of two things. One is, when we talked about that outreach and stakeholder engagement, once again, having a dedicated person whose job it is to go and approach those organizations is so critical, because you have to be proactive oftentimes. You can't wait for folks to come to you. If your true goal is equity and kind of an inclusive tent. So it's just boots on the ground labor. But secondly, what we did was we're working on a dedicated program around the existing Latinx workforce, which oftentimes is unlicensed or undocumented, and providing a program that is completely built for them. So rather than trying to bring folks in to kind of a credit, in our regular college terminology, a credit program where there are a lot of barriers to entry, we're saying let's build a program around an existing workforce that is either marginalized or kind of hasn't been reached by traditional higher education models, and let's be deliberate about that. So as opposed to like, let's try to bring folks in and put them on as an addendum to an existing program, let's build something that really works for that community from the ground up. And again, there's resources involved in that, but it's going to be great. It's going to be very deliberate, and I think it's going to be a win-win for the population and for the community.
All right. Well, we are actually at time. I feel like we're just getting started with the discussion. I wish we could have another half hour. But our speakers graciously provided their contact information. So for anyone watching who wants to follow up, that is certainly an opportunity. We want to thank everyone for joining today. We'd also like to thank again our speakers so much. Thank you so much for being here. And we'd also like to thank the Bank of America for their support of this work. We encourage everyone to check out the full report and the story map as well at c2es.org. Thanks so much. Have a good day.